Okay, we'd like to call to order the Wednesday, September 19th Board of Education regular meeting. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Brady?
Present.
Mrs. Capabianca? Here. Mr. Cavanero?
Here.
Mrs. Holman here. Mr. Kisco?
Here.
Mr. Marola is not here. Mr. Nargi?
Present.
Mr. Rivera is not here. Mr. Tebow?
Here.
Mr. Traub?
Here.
Mrs. Batchelder? Here. Mrs. DeMonico? Here. Mr. Jocelyn?
Here.
Mrs. Placco? Here. Mayor Bingham is not here. Austin Kelson not here. Kevin Finn not here. Sorcerers Rivera Tamara is not here.
Okay. School community session, public participation. Board invites members of the community to speak on topics to be addressed in the agenda or on other topics of interest. Individuals wishing to make comments are requested to fill out the speaker sign-up sheet, including name and address, which must be stated at the beginning of your comment. The board will not allow comments regarding specific staff members or personal grievances. Courtesy is expected in this limited public forum. The participating time will be limited to 3 minutes per person and 10 minutes overall to guarantee an efficient operation of the meeting. Do we have any sign up?
Anyone else sign up?
Yes, we do. We do. I'll stand. Okay. Troop 4 Boy Scouts. Come on up, gentlemen.
We're just here, we wanted to address that we're here taking notes on this meeting for our communications merit badge. We'd just like everyone to know why we're here.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
You want a camera?
Yes. I was waiting for
We
you.
might have some work for you.
Okay. Well, thank you for telling us. Okay, approval of the agenda. Before we move to approve it, we would like, I believe, to make an addendum.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to include item number 5I, report on special meeting held September 14th.
Okay. We get an approval, vote yes or no on the amendment of the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Okay. Motion to approve the agenda as amended. By Daniel, second by Paul. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Okay, approval of minutes. Board of Education meeting minutes, August 15th, 2012. I get a motion to approve those minutes. So moved by Mr. Brady, second by Mr. Tebow. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? None. Oh, one abstention. Ms. Capabianco abstained. She was not here. Okay, informational sharing and discussion items. Student representatives, we have none. Superintendent report.
First item tonight is to recognize Southwest School for receiving a Dr. Pepper Snapple Group grant of $15,000 to build a playscape for the students at Southwest School. They went out for the grant last spring and did a fine job and have been very active in their fundraising, and this has really given the money a boost. It will be a public community effort to construct the playscape, and they hope to, get it done next spring.
Okay. CRT CAP results.
Monica?
Getting a signal? Okay.
Lori still here? Okay, I can proceed without this if we're not able to do that. All right, since our EE is not cooperating, the information is in your packet, so we'll just take a quick walk through there. Oh, Jerry's coming. I lost the signal on it. If that comes back on, we can go to a visual for the audience. Oh. Thank you. This is a little better so everyone can see the same information. Okay, just a quick refresher, particularly for new board members who may not be accustomed to this data. The CMT is the Connecticut Mastery Test, which is a test that's given to all of our 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And the CAP test is the Connecticut Academic Performance Test, which is given to our 10th graders. Students are tested in either 3 or 4 areas: math, reading, writing for all students, and science for selected grades for 5th, 8th, and 10th grade. On those tests, the students are assigned a performance level, and that varies from advanced to gold, proficient, basic, and below basic. In past years, the federal government set up targets that schools were expected to achieve that were called adequate yearly progress. And students were expected to perform at proficient, goal, or advanced on these tests. In the past, proficient was the level that has been set, and in the following presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the new Connecticut metrics in which goal or advanced is now going to be the goal. Okay, so very quickly, for grade 3, and these are overall district aggregated scores. There is information about the performance of each school at each grade level that is available on a public website, and I'll reference that at the end of the presentation, and that's also included in your packet. Grade 3 is tested in math, reading, and writing. The scores were for math solidly in the upper 80s, the upper 70s for reading, and the mid 80s for writing. As you can see, compared to our 3rd graders last year, there was just a very minor fluctuation in math and writing, and there actually was a strong increase in our reading scores overall for grade 3 in the district. I want to just focus on eSchool. eSchool had an especially strong 3rd grade performance with their scores obviously well above the district averages, and they had a wonderful gain in reading instruction with 92.5% of their students at proficient or better, which reflects the staff's success in working on strategies for reading comprehension and reader text connection. So it was a very successful year at East. In grade 4, all of the scores were solidly in the mid to upper 80% at proficient or better range. Once again, there was just minor fluctuations in the math and writing scores and strong movement in reading. You're probably going to be detecting a theme across our elementary schools with that strong jump in reading this year. And a lot of that had to do with very focused efforts by our literacy support teams in our schools, our reading consultants and our reading coaches, to help support the teachers and the strategies that were necessary for students to do well. Torringford was really kind of our star in terms of 4th grade performance and had 2 areas with 90% or better proficiency, and math obviously in the high 80s as well. So very good year for that class as well. 5th grade adds the 4th test on for science. Overall, as a district, these are really outstanding scores. Everything in the 80s, mid to high 80s and 90s. There's a little bit more movement at grade 5, a slight drop off in our overall math scores, and very, very slight drops in writing and science performance, but once again, a strong improvement in the reading area. Vocal Wetmore continues to be an extremely impressive performer. They've been recognized by state organizations in many of the last couple of years. You take a look at their math scores, reading and writing scores. They have, in 2 areas, over 96% of the students have proficient or better. So in terms of their overall performance, really an outstanding job. 6th grade is only at Torrington Middle School, so we don't have differences aggregated out there across the schools. But once again, scores are in the upper 80s to low 90s. A little bit of movement in math and reading, both on the plus and minus side, but a pretty significant jump in writing. The decline in reading is not too troublesome in my opinion, because last year there was, I believe, between a 7 and a 10% overall jump in their reading scores, which really represented a major shift in instructional focus at the middle school. So the little bit of a leveling there, I think, indicates that they've been able to maintain that progress, even though it's tailed off a little bit. But you can probably tell by the increase in writing where the instructional and curricular emphasis was in the past year, and you're going to see that theme across the 3 middle school grades. Math in the 80s, down just a hair. Reading almost at 90%, off just even less. And once again, writing, a nice firm jump in writing, 8.3% increase in the number of students at proficient or better. Once again, a slight decline in reading, and I think the effects of having professional development and an instructional focus on writing in the middle school. In grade 8, in all of the areas except for science, the scores were solidly in the 80% or better proficiency range. Very minor change in math, slight drop off in reading, big jump in writing scores for our 8th graders in this last year. Science also saw a gain, and I'd like to attribute some of these improvements after that huge jump in reading last year that at the 8th grade was 11%, on the efforts of the staff, the administration, and the support from the district office to carry out very successful professional development and a strong instructional focus on writing, and also on curriculum revisions that were made in the curriculum cycle in science, not this summer, but in the previous summer. Our greatest concerns moving forward is that with the change in performance metrics, we're going to be looking at the number of students who are at goal as opposed to proficient. And even though our scores were very, very strong, mostly in the 80s and 90s, in terms of the numbers of students at proficient, there are some areas and some grades where there are big gaps. And so we'll be looking at those areas because, as you're just going to see in a minute, the new state system is going to reward increases from below basic to basic, from basic to proficient, from proficient to goal. And so we're going to need to concentrate not just on getting students from proficient over the hump into that range, but in seeing improvements in movement in all of those areas. From a statistical point of view, according to the state's statisticians, a 2-point fluctuation is really not considered to be a significant change, especially since you're not comparing the same group of students. Those pluses and minuses that you saw were last year's 3rd graders measured against the previous year. So it's a test that measures the students' performance on the same learning objectives and roughly the same content, but it's a different group of students moving through. And so very often you'll see some fluctuations that occur because of the particular characteristics of a class in terms of their demographics, their background preparation, and other factors. A 10-point change, and we did see a couple of those, is considered dramatic, but we consider particularly a 10-point improvement to be a validation of the district's efforts to try to do what we're supposed to do, which is to improve student performance through aggressive instructional strategies, changes in curriculum, professional development for teachers, and support of teachers to do a better job in helping our students to master the necessary content. So we did see a couple of those, for example, at the middle school in writing, but we're not concerned that those are kind of false positives. We see those as very hard fought, very hard earned increases in performance. Moving on to CAPT. CAPT is similar in some ways to CMT, but it's also a really different test, a really different format, and it's only a single year. Our scores on the CAPT exercise were in the 70s and 80s for the most part, and once again, sort of within a normal fluctuation of performance, measuring this year's 10th graders against the previous year's 10th graders. There really is no way to do a cohort comparison to measure how these students did as 8th graders versus how they do as 10th graders, because the test construction is quite different. But we seem to be, looking at the data from the last couple of years, really turning the corner in math, science, and writing scores. And we're on a steady upward trend that seems to be maintainable of 2 to 3% increase in most of the areas. So, for next steps. This is a change from when I may have spoken to you last time about student testing. The CMT and CAPT will be administered for 2 more years. Originally, the plan was to only have them for 1 additional year, and then to use 2014 as a transitional year between the current assessment system and the new Smarter Balanced Assessment System that the state is going to implement in 2015. However, a lot of work has been done over the summer, and Cheryl can attest to the magnitude and the speed of this work to develop new metrics to measure student performance. And so as a result of that, the state has made a decision to give the test for 2 more years, so that we have data points for a baseline, which is a combination of the last 3 years CMT and CAPT scores, a middle point, and then a 3rd year to draw a line to detect trends. There's still some uncertainty about how the metrics are going to match up to the new test. It's going to probably be apples and oranges for some time, but we're all working on that together. And the things that we need to really continue to pay attention to are preparing our students to do well on the CAPT and the CMT and to master those learning objectives while we're in the process of transitioning to the new Common Core standards. So that's going to be a real challenge for us. We also need to give attention to that large gap between the number of students who are proficient and who are at goal, especially if goal is the goal. And then we're going to need to give teachers the time to drill down into the data and figure out what's going on, where are the students having difficulty, how can we assist them in better understanding, better mastering, and being able to demonstrate their mastery of that information more effectively. So I think that's further information. If you would like to see specific performance for each individual school, or if you want more information about how these different general areas of reading, writing, math, and science break down into strands, you can visit this website, www.ctreports.com, and it will allow you to look at a very wide variety of reports, graphs, and other data. And you can also not only see Torrington's information on there, but information from all the districts across the state. I believe that we have updated the school report cards for 2011-12 for the last school year, and those contain a lot of the same information by school, and those will be posted on the district website as well. Okay, so that's CMT and CAP information. Any questions?
First question is, I assume that there's other data that was given to the district besides proficiency and above. So when you state the way you outline this for whatever reason, would have been nice to have seen the data which would have shown that at proficiency it was 80% and goal was 5%. And so I'm not really positive why you broke down the numbers this way. Did you do it because that's how it was sent to you, or?
No, you're correct that there is a tremendous amount of additional data that's available. I stuck with the measure of proficiency because that is the one that was mandated by the government through No Child Left Behind and through the adequate yearly progress measure as sort of the baseline and the benchmark. You're correct, we do have information on the number of students in each class, each grade, each school that scored at each one of the performance levels. And we have even additional information about within math, there are 25 content strands, how each student, each grade, and each school scored on each one of the content strands that were tested in that grade. So there is an enormous bundle of data, and that's part of what our teachers take an opportunity to look at during our opening day so that they understand how effective their instruction was in the previous year, and they understand more about the profile of their incoming class.
So as an administration, is this administration becoming more proficient at assimilating this information and actually making it productive in the academic year coming up, so that as you get this data, you can relay it to different school districts and
Yeah, I think that we are, because in addition to the information that all of us can see publicly on the CT report site, our district over the past 2 years has been implementing our own district data warehouse tool, and this information is loaded into there as well. So teachers can look at how students performed on locally administered assessments that they've made up themselves, their benchmark tests throughout the year, and to see how well those correlate with the state's test results as well. So, I mean, it gives them more of an opportunity to really try to diagnose where students are strong and where students are weak through using that data more effectively.
And it becomes a way where we can almost begin to predict how our students will do on mastery testing for at least the next 2 years.
and then the second one is just an observation, which it seems like the students coming into 6th grade based on these scores they're much more proficient, and I mean, my observation would almost be by the time they get through middle school, by the 8th grade, there seems to be a group of kids, obviously, may not be obvious because obviously they're different groups of kids. You know, this 6th grade is not necessarily measured to that 8th grade. But if you just assuming that the 6th grade for 3 years was 90% in math, 90%, 90%, which it shows that just 6th grade year over year was 0.4%. And then you go to the 8th grade, it's now down to 84.6%. My observation would be that in the transition from the grammar school, they come in pretty well prepared, and then by the time they progress through the middle school, they're starting to find more difficulties. A certain group of them, because obviously, you know, you're still at 84, but why are you losing that 5%?
I mean, I think your observation is a reasonable one to draw from just looking at the numbers, but what the numbers don't tell you is that in each grade level, there are a slightly different menu of content strands that are tested. And some of the easier ones that have to do with number sense and basic facts and fractions, decimals, and percentages, which the students work on for year after year after year, and they become very proficient at, drop off as the students get up into the upper grades. And there are more content strands that have to do with algebraic thinking and geometry concepts and other things. So even though the tests are similar, in each grade level they measure a slightly different and a slightly more aggressive menu of skills that students are expected to have mastered at that grade level. So in some cases, you know, there are some things to be concerned about. In other cases, we understand why there are some differences, but in addition to that grade to grade, you know, grade 8 comparison, we also keep data on the students in terms of how they themselves have grown personally from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade. And the state does that through a system of statistical analysis called vertical scales. And we also do that through a graph that we used to include in the student report cards about how many students were able to maintain their performance level, how many improved over their previous year's performance level, and how many declined. So that information is actually available for you on the school report cards in a pie graph so that you can see how students did roughly against themselves in the previous year.
And what also can be determined if you went on to CT reports, which we do, how this cohort, how they scored in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade in the core content areas on the CMTs. So we can see, has there been growth? They may, when they were in 6th grade, they may not have scored as well as our 6th graders did this year. And so, but if they've made good growth over the 3 years and made gains, you know, we had a higher percentage scoring in proficient and above, then yes, we're doing our job.
Thank you.
Mr. Brady.
Just a quick question. Proficient means what % mastery of the content area? So like we're saying that 86% of the kids are proficient. What does that equate to in terms of % of the mastery?
The exact number varies a little bit by, there's a raw score and a scale score, and so once all of the students in the state of Connecticut have been assessed, the state sets the cutoffs for each of the different performance levels. So it varies in terms of percentage, but you know, they don't, these different performance levels don't equate exactly to a B, C, D sort of area, but proficiency is considered a rigorous enough standard to say that the students have adequate skills to be able to do grade level work at the next grade. Obviously, goal is better and advanced is great. And there are some areas when we look at how the scores break out, as Mr. Nargi mentioned earlier, we have a high number of students performing at the advanced levels in certain subject areas and certain grades. So if you want to think of it as C or better, that's kind of a way to conceptualize it, but it may not actually work out that way in terms of percentages and how much content they were able to master.
And going into a proficient goal or advanced score, there's multiple different types of assessments. Like for literacy, there's a DRP, there's passages that you do a written response, there's vocabulary, there's many subtests that go into giving you this proficient goal or advanced or basic or below basic.
Okay.
Anyone else? No, yes.
Do we have the cohort data on our website or only on the state?
The cohort data from 3rd to 4th and 4th to 5th is on the school report cards. It's right on our website.
What about 5 to 6?
5 to 6, I'm not sure whether we do that one or not because of the changes that occur in what content strands are tested. There are vertical scale scores, though, from the state that exist for 5 to 6 in just math and reading, not in writing or in science, because the content's not closely enough aligned.
Thank you. I don't think you can breathe it. You want a drink of water?
Nah,
Okay.
let's just forge ahead. She's used to it.
Okay, performance index.
This is where we will be moving to.
Get out your calculators. This is a tough one, and it was very difficult to put this presentation together because of the complexity of the new state accountability system. There were some of us who have attended meetings over the past couple of months that said, can we just have the old NCLB guidelines back again, because we understood them, we understood how they were worked out, what the formulas were, and what they meant for us. And now we have a lot of different metrics that are coming into play. If you followed education news in the newspaper, you'll know that the state of Connecticut was granted an NCLB, a No Child Left Behind, federal education reform legislation waiver in May of this year. In fact, I believe Arnie Duncan was here and made the announcement along with Commissioner Pryor and the governor at a school down in New Haven. I think think it was. One of the positives of this waiver from the federal legislation is that districts have been given more flexibility in the use of Title I funds, which are funds that come from the federal government that support our efforts to improve basic programs in our poorest schools. There are also going to be new school classifications that are developed as a result of these new performance metrics, with schools who are Category 1 and 2 being our highest performing schools across the state, and schools who are in Categories 3, 4, and 5 being those that are under scrutiny, that may become schools where the state gets involved in leveling some different interventions to try to improve student performance. So there are going to be these new measures for both school and district performance. There is no more AYP. And so in the past, we may have heard that our schools didn't make AYP. They didn't hit a specific target of the number of students who are at the proficient level. And as a result, they were called in need of improvement. And so now that there is no more AYP, there is no more label of a school being in need of improvement.
And so I just want to remind the board that that AYP score increased, the number that we had to hit, the percentage raised every year, you know, kept going up and up. And so it was like
A moving target.
yeah.
So now, in place, we couldn't just say to the federal government, no thanks, we don't want your accountabilities anymore. We had to substitute something in that was developed by our state in place of the NCLB regulations and guidelines. And so the state has come up with what they've called school and district performance indices. These indices will include not just the aforementioned reading and math and sometimes writing and science, but all 4 of those areas for all groups, for all grades, for all schools, for all districts. So they're going to be generating a lot more information about student performance. They will include the same breakdowns of data according to our number of students who get free and reduced lunch, our students who are English language learners, by ethnicity groups, specifically Black and Hispanic students, and other factors for students with disabilities or special education students. In addition to all of these demographic factors that we're used to seeing along with our CMT and CAPT scores right now, we're also going to have a graduation rate factored in for high schools. In this new system, rather than taking a test, getting a raw score, getting a scale score, and having a performance level assigned, all of that will still happen, but in addition to once students have taken a test and have a score, then they'll be put into these categories, and each of these categories will count for a specific number of points. And the state will be able to calculate an individual index, and then by adding together all the individuals, dividing by the number of students in the school, a school index, and then by adding all the schools together and dividing by the number of schools, a district index. So it's very math-driven. In addition to the students who take what they call a census test or a regular test, our special education students who take a modified assessment or who take a special test called a checklist, which is generally for our most disabled students and is generally geared towards their instructional program. Those assessment tools will also have a point value that gets factored into their school and their district performance index. So, like I said, it's very math heavy. With NCLB, the target was 100% at proficient by 2014. And as Cheryl alluded to earlier, there were interim targets that schools and districts had to meet in order to make steady progress towards that 100% in the year of 2014.
And so just, you know, when you look at grade 3, we were last year 87.6% at math who are proficient. So in 2 years, we would have to get to 100%, and that's all students, period.
So in some cases, we were closer, in other cases, we were a little bit further away. But Cheryl's correct that it was an absolute target. And there was one sort of mitigating factor that was called the confidence interval that they would factor in. But for the most part, it was a very ambitious and rigorous target. And I think that many districts that applied for the waivers felt that it was an unfair standard for schools that had students who struggled with a variety of different learning issues. Yes?
Just point of clarification, just so are these federal targets now?
The Connecticut ones are state, only in Connecticut, just state targets. The federal one was the NCLB, the 100% at proficient.
All right, so these are state. So
Yep.
you can't determine, okay, including,
So and what's a little bit confusing is that the 88 that you see there is not 88%, but it's 88 points on the index. So it's a little bit of a different apples to oranges kind of measurement, and we're not really going to be able to accurately compare the state scale against the previous body of data once we make this conversion. But these are the targets that the state is now set. These are not federal targets. So to have the student and subgroup achievement at 88, to have our achievement gaps be 10 points or less, and for the graduation rate to be 94% for a 4-year graduation rate, and that's to count all the students who entered as freshmen and then graduated 4 years later, versus the 96% for an extended rate, and that would be students who entered but might take more than 4 years to graduate for a variety of different reasons, or for students who exited from the school but didn't enroll in another school, would normally be counted as dropouts, and other mitigating factors. In the state accountability metrics, the schools and the districts are expected to make it halfway to their targets by 2018, so it's an extended period of time. We're not looking at 2014 staring us in the face. We have a little bit longer to work on these areas. In areas where we are well below that 88 target, the state says, well, you're well below. As long as you're making 3 points or better improvement on an annual basis, then you're doing what you can, you're working hard. We won't intervene. We won't give you additional things that you need to try to implement.
And Sue, just credit to you and what you've been doing over the past 3 years is that we have been making slow, steady gains across the board. So that, I think, you know, we could make the 3 points of progress.
And the real credit goes to the teachers who are doing the work in the classroom every day, and the principals for their leadership in the building as well. So we're there to support those efforts. These are our baseline scores. In order to get a baseline score, the state looked at our CMT and CAP performance over the last 3 years, not just last year's, but they took 3 years worth of data, and they averaged them together, and they created a baseline score, provided us with that information, and also gave us a target for next year, for the 2012-13 school year. Our overall district performance index is at 78.9. Okay, so almost 80, so it seems like, you know, if 88 is our target overall, then we still have a little bit of room for growth, but it's not too bad. Of all of the areas, remember I mentioned really 9 different areas: math, reading, writing, science, and then all the demographic groups, students with disabilities, English language learners, free and reduced lunch. There were 9 of them altogether. Of those 9, we were in the 80s in the area of math. So as a district, we are doing pretty well in that area overall. In the 70s, we had our free and reduced lunch, our students in poverty, our black students, reading as an area, writing as an area, and science as an area. So these are areas where we'll be expected to make at least 3 points of growth overall in the upcoming year. And then we did have a couple of areas where we really need to dig in and try to do some different kinds of things to support the achievement of these particular groups of students. Our students with disabilities, our special education students, our Latino students, and our English language learners. One of the issues that we've struggled with our English language learners are the state rules that require them to participate in the state assessment program after being in
10 months.
the country for a short amount of time. So I know that's something that's near and dear to Mrs. Clacko's heart, but as you're going to see in the next segment of this, we've actually made remarkable progress for our English language learners, but it's still a group where we need to attend to their learning needs in a...
And so I would also like to say that really, even though we have multiple languages spoken in the district, the greatest second language or first language for children learning English as their second language is Spanish. And so our ELL and Hispanic piece go hand in hand.
linked, yeah. What I'm sharing with you on this screen are the overall school indices. When each of the schools received their data, they got an overall score, but then they got scores in each one of those other 9 areas that I mentioned. So there's, once again, there's a lot of data that's coming out to the schools in order to try to pinpoint areas of strength or weakness or particular groups that may have particular learning needs. So in our elementary schools, remember 88 being sort of the overall target. East baseline index is at 85.4. The baseline for Forbes, 79.7. Southwest, 77.1. Torringford, 81.2. And Vogel-Wetmore at 77.5. None of our elementary schools had a subgroup of students large enough to generate a score for our black students, and only Vogel and Torringford had enough students in the group to be able to generate a score for English language learners. So when you look at their indices, there's some missing pieces of data on there. It's not that they're missing, but just that there's not enough information to compute the score. One area that we will be especially concerned about is that in all of our elementary schools, our students with disabilities had an index score below 70. And so as a district, we see that. In each one of our schools, we see that as well. In our secondary schools, the middle school's overall index score was 79.1, and the high school was at 66.9. And in some ways, it's a little bit disappointing, but it's also not a direct comparison to the other scores because they have some additional pieces of information that factor into the computation of their overall score, including the 4-year and the extended dropout rate. You'll notice that the cohort graduation rate, which are those students who graduate in 4 years, is at 78.6%, and the extended graduation rate is much higher at 85.8%. And once again, at the secondary levels, both the middle school and the high school, our weakest areas are special education students, our Latino students, and our English language learners. So there's some room to grow in there, but we're not too far out of the ballpark. So moving forward, it's our intention to share and analyze information about these indices. They're new to us, they're very data rich, they're very math rich, and try to make sure that we understand what they mean for us, what information they tell us about our students and what their learning needs are. We need to take a look at whatever interventions we have in place and see what tweaks we can make to address student needs, particularly in the area of curriculum, instruction, extended day programming, and other interventions that we can try to improve student achievement. And to look at improving student achievement at all levels, not just getting students over the bar from below basic or basic to proficient, but to move up in each one of those levels. Because for each performance level that a student increases, they add really about 1/3 of a point to their individual index, which aggregates to improving the school's index, which aggregates to improving the district's index. So that's what I have to share about the new accountability metrics. Mr. Murphy.
Okay. Cohort graduation rate,
Yes.
78.6. What does that mean?
That means that 78.6% of the students graduated in a 4-year period. They entered as freshmen, or freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and they graduated.
So we have a drop out, and for what year is that?
That's an aggregated figure for the last 3 years. So 3 years added up, divided by 3, that's the index.
That's mind-boggling. I mean, when I first got on this board, this district was really alarmed, outraged, whatever type of descriptive words you want to talk about, our graduation rate. And I thought we were making progress, and for 3 years we're...
It's figured differently than...
Well, I mean, it's, the kids are graduating, that's why I'm asking. I mean, this number reflects kids who get a diploma and those that don't. I mean, 78.6 for 3-year average.
Well, does that take into account kids that transfer? I mean, do they just take the number of freshmen for 3 years, number of graduates for 3 years and come up with it, or did they adjust it for transfer students, or?
I don't know that.
I'm asking.
There's a lot of variations in terms of what counts and what doesn't count, which have been embedded in these formulas to try to make them be more fair. For example, when you're getting a student's or a school's performance index, they only count the scores of the students who were enrolled in that school or in that district for the previous 10 months. So you only either get credit for or get penalized for the students that you educated and then assess, not for students who move into the district the month before the test and they're yours, you own them, and their scores belong to you, even though they may have been transient, they may have been not attending school, they may have been not successful in their former school. The same thing is also true for English language learners and special education students, that they maintain their membership in those other groups for a period of up to 2 years, beyond the time that they may be exited from those services or dismissed from special education. So when I said it was complicated, I really meant it. And when I shared this information with the principals, I said, you can go back and try to compute these on your own, but it's going to be very difficult because a single student's score is disaggregated into, is that student an ELL student? Is that student Black? Is that student Hispanic? Is it English? Is it science? Whatever. So in some cases, yes, those are our students. In other cases, they're students that may have had their elementary education somewhere else and they came to us in the high school. They may have been students who previously attended another program outside of the district, like a technical school or a vocational school or a magnet school, and they've come back to us. But it's hard to figure.
But you go back to what was alarming to this district, and none of you were, well, you were here, Cheryl, but Danielle, you weren't here. And it was just a really big alarming issue, what our graduation rate was. And to think that 5 years later, this is what it is. I mean, who's accountable for it? Is it the board? Is it the administration? I mean, at some point, or is no one accountable for it? Is it just the kids, the motivation of the kids? I mean, somehow we have to get a better handle of accountability. And it's not necessarily that it's the superintendent's accountability or the board's accountability or the family member, but I mean, I don't know that answer, but somebody, when you spend the type of money we do to educate all our students, and at the end of the day, you either get your diploma or you don't get your diploma. This is just not acceptable. In any manner, it's not acceptable for the amount of effort, commitment that administrators, teachers, students, the whole group, everyone's trying to participate. And yet you still come up with no real progress in my 5 years here. I mean,
What, and you're right, we do have to make education part of every student's quality of life. They have to realize how important it is to get an education and what it can do for them as they move on, you know, post-graduation. what I think is critical is when you take a look at, okay, here was the cohort. That means they started in freshman year and they ended 4 years later to the date, to the time. One of the things I think we found out over the past year and a half or so is that our students really need options and choices, hence, you know, the online learning. But look at the difference between the kids who entered as freshmen and left as seniors, and then just by adding a few things such as the online learning and how many more students we were able to graduate over the summer, and we added 8% more. That's a pretty good jump. And that was only by adding that from February on. So we have to continue as we explore how we're going to work with the high school and look at the small learning communities, looking at the 9th grade academy, so that there aren't so many students who have to repeat their freshman year. Because any child who has to repeat their freshman year, they're not part of that cohort graduation rate, because they didn't do it in 4 years. Any student, I mean, between last year and this year, I think we enrolled, I want to say 22 students who were second language learners who entered school in the United States for the first time. They're 16, 17 years of age. They're coming in as 9th graders. They've had gaps in their education in their home country. They may have only had an education to sixth grade, comparable to what we do. And now they're in the high school, and we're supposed to get them through in 4 years while they're simultaneously learning the second language. Can't be done. It can't be.
I want to come right back to you. Well, John and then Paul.
The state, among the dozens of committees they set up last year, set up a committee to study the definition of graduation. In fact, I watched the hearing on CTN this past week. So the state recognizes there is no good definition of graduation rate. So we may get some better definition to that later on. A couple questions, quick ones. So on the performance indices, we are looking at Black and Hispanic students separately. Do they self-report that? In other words, does the parent of a child decide how to report the ethnicity or race of a child?
Yes, they do, and there are also additional categories that are used to disaggregate the data. For the first time within the past couple of years, the students and families may select mixed race also as a designation, which is a federally recognized designation that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago.
There's also Asian American and Native American.
Okay, so we disaggregate for Asians as well, among others. Okay, thank you.
Oh, there we go. Now I have 2 questions. One more comment, I guess, about the graduation. That graduation statistic is, I think, one of the real concerns of mine is there's going to be an awful lot of downward pressure now from the state to increase that graduation rate, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on boards of education to play games with qualifications for requirements for graduation. I think we have to make a decision as a board going forward and keep ourselves aware of that. I think we need a proper discussion about this. That is it more important for us to maintain our own standards for requirements, even if that means it doesn't necessarily get reflected in their graduation rate, or do we dumb down the graduation rate to meet state requirements? Because there's going to be pressure coming down, and we're going to have to deal with that sometime soon. So I think that should be an upfront discussion, at a full board level.
I'm going to say we maintain the rigor, okay, and what we expect, because we hand a student a diploma.
Right. And so I think we need, to support the administration in that, because they're the ones who are going to feel the heat ultimately from the state if this rate, does not improve. One. Number 2, following up on John's point, and this is just a question in terms of reporting out. Reporting these subgroups, I understand making a subgroup defined by a special need. That's a hurdle that needs some sort of compensatory index to adjust. I understand a foreign language student. Again, another hurdle, a realistic hurdle. And I understand poverty. poverty has its own set of bounds, you know, that is a specific hurdle that kids have to get over. At this point in 2012, is that really a hurdle? The fact that, you know, is there a point to reporting the fact that you're black? I mean, do we need to study these kids as a real subgroup now?
Probably not in Torrington.
Right, I understand, exactly
okay,
my point.
But in other, your other major
In
cities.
major cities you do. So, and we can't get, it just seems,
There's a.
this wealth of information, ultimately, in my experience and in my my estimation, is going to be more confusing ultimately than enlightening. You know, we're going to be so twisted and torn trying to make sense of so much of this data that there really should be a push back on the state to get more localized in what's really important to report out of our city, our school district, to see to really, you know, concretely study what is progress and what is not progress. And like I said, I don't know if so many of those subports, that doesn't matter if a kid is Asian or not. You know, it matters if he's poor or she's poor, yeah. Or if they speak Vietnamese and not English, yes, but that goes into the language issue, not the ethnicity. So is this a concern that we should raise at the state level in terms of the state is trying to find its own feet on a lot of this, it seems? Is this, or just let it be and not?
We can say that that particular subgroup does not impact the results that we're presenting to you. And so, you know, it'll come out negligent, or there won't be a number. They won't count it as a subgroup.
Does it have any negative effect on you know, kids of color? I mean, when they have to report out as black kids, does that have any, you know, is there any resentment on their part that, you know, why are you looking at? No,
not really. Having, you know, been an administrator in a predominantly black school, black African American.
No, but in a diverse high school like this, in a diverse school system like this, do they at all know that there's not some sort of resentment about the fact that they are being, you know?
No, I had an opportunity to present over to the church there. Mr. Battles invited me a couple of weeks ago just to present, and no, I think they want what we all want for our children.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of Bill Battle, quite frankly, when I'm saying this. I think I'm expressing pretty much his sentiments. Why break this out, you know?
But it's not that way in other cities. It's not that way in other states.
All right. Well, I get that. I guess there's no way of separating this out. It just seems, it's so, just being ultimately better.
I think it's just the way the information from the state is being printed out and take it for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Ella?
So you said in elementary schools, none of the schools have black subgroup. What number constitutes a subgroup?
20. It used to be 40, and they've reduced it to a smaller grade, so it's 20 students.
Per grade level.
Per grade level.
That's
So
why
we
you
don't
need
have
ELL.
those numbers, so therefore they won't.
There's no data
Count.
on those points.
Okay. So they'll be in another group.
They'll be in all of the subject area groups. If there are students in poverty, they'll be members of that group. All of the, for those of you who like statistics, all the ends change for each of those groups. The overall number that goes into the averages that are generated in the index.
And that's why we presented, you know, overall percentages for grade levels, and, you know, we could get so into the numbers, it almost starts becoming.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, my concern.
But this whole exercise, and again, is, you give us a lot of data, and it's nice that we have this presentation. But as a board member, I'd like to be hearing from the administration in September, October, November, what needs to be done, obviously this year, but also in the preparation of next year's budget. But get this information to us, presented this to us now, and I'd like to think that the administration has thoughts on solutions, improvements to these spots, these areas of weakness, to get it to the board so that we have a period of time to question and simulate your information so that when budget season comes, we can prioritize what is important, what isn't important, as opposed to, now we heard this data like we hear last year, the 5 years I've been here, and then it seems like it just kind of dies. I like hearing it, I like having this conversation, but it's really irrelevant unless you can quantify it for us as board members to make priorities when it comes to the budget.
One of the goals that we're going to be putting forward to become a board goal, if we all decide on it, is to, we set up a 3-year strategic plan, and we did a 5-year capital plan. One of the things I've asked the superintendent to look into is a 3-year strategic budget. What areas are we going to need, if you have a, if we're doing it and we're doing a curriculum plan out for 3 years, put a number on that. Let us plan 3 years in advance. If we know that we're going to switch a math program, or we're going to need to address the dropout rate, or we're going to need to address one of the cohorts that was identified in our new groups, give us a projection. We're going to need $2.5 million to do this. We're going to need, in curriculum and professional, whatever. We're going to need staff to kind of give us a better idea as we're going forward, that we can go to the Board of Finance and say, okay, you can get a 0 this year, but you know what? To meet all these state requirements, we are projecting, we're going to need X, Y, and Z in the next 3 years because we have to meet these goals. So, we did under Chris, we did kind of step 1 where we developed a plan, but we didn't put any money to it or staffing needs or whatever we're going to have to do. So one of the goals of when we get together for our next, hopefully soon, retreat, to set our board goals so we can assess our administration to it. That was one of the ones that I was looking at, was to try to pull that together.
And maybe what you're saying is actually something that can be accomplished. Maybe we need to have more consistent dialogue with the Board of Finance versus the process that we have. So when you come up with an idea about a reading program or whatever, then maybe you should, with Ken as the chairman, go to the next Board of Finance meeting. Say, this is just something that everything else being equal, this is something that
As part of the transparency we want to do, so that instead of, and I'm sure this will end up in tomorrow's paper, but instead of just getting, like happened this year, an arbitrary number thrown at us, we're cutting, we can show them that in projecting 3 years forward for what our true needs are going to be to get the district where it's supposed to be, then, hey, listen, we have to do this, this, and this. And, you say you're going to cut me $735,000. I need $6.2 million. I mean, we have 3-year contracts with most of our unions right now, at least 2. So we know what the next couple of years, as far as salaries, are going to bring us. So that's fairly easy to project that out. So it's really going to be a curriculum need and a program need to get us in line with what we're going to, what the assessments are going to be.
Well, and a huge, that would be huge in terms of staffing.
Right.
As teachers retire, who do we, let's not just do, put it saying, there might be other types of teachers and staff that we need.
Oh, yes,
And as we,
Right.
We were constantly, and for a good reason or bad reason, is, one of the things that saves us in our budget cycle is looking at money saved per teacher because we had a retirement, we were able to fill the slot at this, and that's a savings for us. Well, like you said, we might need to add 7 reading teachers. We might need to add 8 math teachers. We might need to, that might have to be a real projection.
Computer technology skills.
Right.
Paul, at some point in your tenure here, didn't we used to have a Board of Finance member who actually was the liaison? Who actually
During the budget
attended?
time.
It
During
was
the
only the
budget
budget time, or was it?
Yeah, somebody. Yeah,
No, I'm talking about, what's his name?
There was a liaison.
Yeah, but he showed up, no, I'm talking